All right, and welcome to another session here at ClimaCon. I am Dan Slagan, CMO at Tomorrow.io, and I'm thrilled to have Jeff Martin here, co-founder and CEO of Aero Design Labs. Jeff, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Dan. My pleasure to be here.
So we are here to talk all things aviation, a lot going on in this space. Would love just to start, give us a bit of your background and experience. It would be great for the audience to get a sense.
No, thanks, Dan. 35 years in the industry. Started out at Southwest Airlines back in 1989. Started off in the ops team actually as a line pilot, and then worked up through management. And spent 22 years at Southwest Airlines in a management role and continued to fly the 737. And then went over to JetBlue, where I was executive vice president of operations. And then just finished a 3-year stint as chief operating officer at WestJet in Calgary, Alberta. And then recently, about a year, took over as the president and CEO of Aero Design Labs. So 35 years of being kind of hands-on in the operations side, on the finance side, and always quite closely tied to climate. I mean, operations and efficiencies and carbon, all those things we're going to talk about. Kind of been hands-on with that for over 35 years.
It's great. We're incredibly fortunate to have you at the conference this year, and your background is fantastic. Hey, the best way, I think, to break up the conversations today for the audience, we're going to sort of cut it up between focus on tactical, focus a little bit on flight ops, get into sustainability. There's a lot to talk about. I'm excited to hear your thoughts. Start sort of general weather impact. What right now are kind of the biggest concerns and knock-on effects that airlines are experiencing around weather and climate?
Well, anyone who lives in airline operations and also the customers and guests throughout the world, you feel it every day, right? There's one thing that we can't manage or change is weather. What we try to do is have the best programs and techniques and technology we can to deliver a great, reliable product. Weather will always be there. So I think throughout my career, I've always led through OCCs, the Operational Control Centers. Think of the NASA Nerve Center. Every airline has one, where thousands of flights for every individual airline flow through. You've got teams of dispatchers and weather analysts and forecasters who are sitting there on a daily basis trying to figure out, how do I navigate around today's Rubik's Cube? The beauty of this job, and it can be addictive, is it changes every day. So if you level a puzzle, you get to take one apart and put it back together every day. So that parlays into a need for real-time weather. Determining whether you're going to dispatch, whether you're going to hold, whether you're going to divert. Do I launch my bank? Do I not launch my bank? That equates into customer satisfaction and also equates into hard dollars, because every time the airplane's sitting there running engines, one, if you're not moving, the customer's frustrated, and two, you're burning valuable CASM, and also from a CO2 standpoint, you're adding tonnage to the air. So real-time weather and real-time capability of forecasting, I can't think of anything more important to an airline.
Yeah, and if you think about the decisions and the processes that need to go into what, the operating decisions that are made, how does it break between sort of the way things used to be done in a manual way and how things are starting to become more automated? How is it advancing the ability to operate as an airline?
I kind of smile because I'm dating myself, but I can remember when we would do deviation or irregularity packages. You have weather coming towards, let's say at JetBlue, we saw this regularly. New York, a highly concentrated municipality with 3 major airports. When weather comes, disruption occurs. So we used to process cancellation packages in advance manually. And by the time you would process that package, the weather's either already hit or changed, and your accuracy was really, really quite feeble. Now, with the use of technology, with the press of a button, you can generate those deviations. You can notify the customer who really wants to know real time. What we're saying you do is get somebody to an airport and then find out they're canceled there. So I've seen it metamorphose, right, from what used to be manual packages of weather charts on a wall to now every dispatcher, every pilot sharing real-time information, real-time strategy of here's how we're going to run the airline today based on what we think is going to happen. how we're going to manage today's flow of aircraft, and quite honestly, just getting everybody on one page and one sheet of music on how you're going to execute the schedule.
Yeah, it makes it. And do you notice any big differences or sort of inconsistencies based on where you are in the world? You know, if you're operating in North America or
Well,
Latin America.
yeah, I'll be careful how I say this, but I mean, certain countries and certain continents have just become more robust with their IT platforms. It's almost like it's becoming a competitive advantage. It is a competitive advantage. The airline that has the strongest IT, the most real up-to-date information, quite honestly, has a competitive advantage over the others, and that varies by sophistication of continent and sophistication of airline, and quite honestly, dedication of investing capital towards those products.
Hey, can you expand a little bit on the competitive advantage piece? Because one thing we love to say here is sort of climate security has become the new cybersecurity. And you think about any company out there, and you imagine a CSO joining and saying, you know, we're not gonna use automated or scalable systems to monitor against cyber threats. We're just going to use humans. We're going to use manual ways. You can't imagine that being said. Curious, sort of what the thought is there in the aviation world.
Yeah, it makes me smile because I'm thinking of algorithms, I'm thinking of artificial intelligence, all the things that can help us predict weather and previous weather patterns. And then you tie that together with how does air traffic control behave in those certain conditions. You can almost predict what the worldwide network will do from an airspace standpoint. So as AI starts to learn from that, you then reverse that and say, okay, I know that I have a weather pattern that's going to hit my domicile, my major hub, in 12 hours. I know that if I don't start feathering or leaning out my schedule by so many hours, at some point I reach a tipping point. Having real-time forecasts, having those algorithms with fidelity makes all the difference in the world for the airlines. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what the future looks like.
Yeah, that's great. Great. So let's move on to flight ops a little bit. Would love to get a sense from you. What role, what challenges does weather really play around sort of pre-flight and the landing process? To kind of what goes into it, what can be tricky during each of those processes?
Well, I think it starts with the planning process, right? You got a dispatcher who is hours ahead of the flight crew arriving, and they're mapping out what that day's weather is going to look like. Their dispatch release is going to be amended. Their legality, their piece of paper that the pilot and the dispatcher handshake agree upon in the eyes of the FAA or the regulator on how they're going to operate the flight. Now the key decision is how much fuel do I put on the aircraft? Fuel equals weight, weight equals burn, burn equals carbon, right? So optimally, you want to land exactly on plan. If you don't have good fidelity in weather forecasting, what typically will happen is pilots may put more fuel on there to give themselves more contingency, and that ensures completion factor, but it also increases the cost for the airline. So from the beginning, 2 hours prior to flight to end of flight, dispatcher and the pilot are having that handshake agreement on. It all comes down to how much fuel will be on the aircraft to make sure you can complete the mission.
Got it. Makes sense. And then once you're up, sort of
Okay.
in flight disruptions around unexpected turbulence and those types of things, what kind of challenges does that pose?
It's gotten better. Every airline can map out, and they do map out what your yearly cost is, and quite honestly, in turbulence, disruptions, and injuries. Flying into unknown turbulence, if the crew's not prepared, obviously puts the crew at risk, and it puts the guests at risk. So there are products out there now, and they're starting to evolve, right, that give you real more time data. Uh, Better mapping on iPads. iPads have probably changed more in the cockpit than anything in the last 10 years. Being able to geographically plot where that turbulence is and to plan ahead for that. So it's real-time dollars, it's real-time safety, it's real-time satisfaction for the guests, and it's just one facet of what you can do with real-time data.
Yeah. And as you think about over the course of the year, again, on the seasonality side, we're heading into Q2 now, Q3 and four
Yes.
coming out. Are there specific challenges or sort of weather parameters that are top of mind? Obviously, it depends on where you're at in the world, but they're coming into Q2. What's top of mind for you right now in the
Yeah,
industry?
you're spot on. Springtime and summer means advection, convection, right? So you've got lifting air masses, higher propensity towards turbulence. Plus, then you've got the mesoscale complexes where you get major thunderstorms, which that equals diversions. So they're like little miniature nuclear bombs, right? When they go off, and you hope they don't go off near airports, which creates wind shear. But this is the time of year when dispatch and the pilots have to be very cognizant of air masses, lifting fronts, and the potential for those nuclear thunderstorm bombs to occur. And it's very disruptive for airlines. The problem is you can predict them to some degree, unless it's a fast-moving cold front. But sometimes they just pop up, right? And that's where that real-time data being fed from the dispatcher to the pilot, in addition to what they have on the radar, it's just it's a requirement for them to have that.
Yeah, and that exactly what I was going to lead into. So, as you know, we have our satellite program going up. We're going to launch our first couple satellites towards the end of this year
Exciting.
with the full scale constellation, and it's going to be equipped with both sounders and radar. It'll be multi-sensor. But on the radar front, how much does that change things with our ability to now be able to first see over oceans, be able to see in remote parts of the world? It'll really be the first time where we're going to have a full-blown constellation up there that'll be sending back down data in real time to your point. Curious how much of a game changer you think that is for things like transatlantic flights, remote parts of the world, everything else.
Yeah, transatlantic flying. Some airlines new to that. Some been doing it for many years. You've never had the coverage, right? You've never had air traffic control, ADS-Bs changing that so you have better situational awareness where the other aircraft are around you, and then tying that into weather, turning that into real-time data. It's really tough when you cross, let's just say, the North American tracks. Deviating off track is quite a large deal, and there's procedures in place. And imagine all of the airlines of the world were flowing one direction, let's just say Europe to the US, and all of a sudden there's a weather pattern that pops up in the middle of the NAT tracks. How do you take all of the worldwide fleet and navigate them 20 degrees left or 20 degrees right? So that, again, that real-time data provides efficiency. Efficiency equals less fuel burn, right, and less carbon. So it's something that the industry's been waiting for and needing for quite some time.
Yeah, it's always surprising to people, myself as well, when you first learn that we haven't had that type of coverage over the oceans.
Right, right.
So, all right, great. So, covered some tactical, we've covered some flight ops. Would love to move into kind of our biggest section here around ESG sustainability. Obviously, it's the theme of the conference. We're seeing everything from new SEC regulation to airlines around the world, updating their sustainability reports, ESG reports, and we're seeing some great things. But let's sort of start, you know, adapting and operating within a changing climate. It's getting more volatile, harder to predict. What's top of mind just operationally for teams?
Yeah, I think operationally top of mind is you got to go back to IATA. Thanks for IATA putting Corsia together. You got 290 airlines that are part of IATA, and having a roadmap, because without a roadmap, how do you ever get to the end game? If you can't see it, how do you change it? So my hat's off to IATA for putting the Corsia plan together, which is net zero carbon emissions by 2050. That's not that far away. And what that roadmap has laid out is basically dissecting that in 20-year increments. But IATA will also tell you what the airlines are doing tactically and strategically is how do you meet that 2050 net zero? It looks like about 65% of that will probably come in SAF. 13% of that will come in new technologies, which is electric propulsion, hydrogen, and the space that we live in is finding drag reduction on aircraft. 3% in infrastructure, which what you just kind of talked about with better ATC and weather predictability. There's a way to reduce fuel. So I think that's where that 3% lies, probably where what you were talking about. And then 19% in offsets. So there's the roadmap. All the airlines have to figure out where they plug in, and then how do you work backwards from 2050 to where you are in 2020, and giving the OEMs time to design better engines, new wing types, and new fuselage types, anything to reduce drag. So there is a plan, right? And I think 2050 will probably come sooner than we think. And you're starting to see more airlines speak about it. And it's different probably in the US than it is in Europe. But I think at some point it comes, excuse the pun, but it's one world, right? It's a one world alliance on how you manage around IATA and meeting that 2050 net zero goal. And you're starting to see more and more in the press, which is good.
Yeah, I agree with you. In a weird way, 2050 doesn't seem all that far off.
No.
But as you talk about sort of knowing your end goal and having a target in mind, to some degree, it feels like you're trying to plan for a moving target on a moving target because you're rebuilding and you're streamlining the next wave of innovation. But then you also have climate, which continues to change. I mean, even what we've seen in the last 5 years here in the Boston area, we've seen wind events at Logan Airport go up astronomically just in the past 5 years. The team
Yep.
has to adapt. They have to say, all right, now that that's happening, how do we update our operating procedures across the board? What do you feel like will be some of the biggest challenges that teams might not expect or that will come up as we are working towards a more sustainable future?
Well, I think you hit on it really, really well, Dan. We've seen it just in the last couple of years with wildfires and the change of climate and how it's starting to impact what we see on the news. But if you take that down a level, how is that impacting airline operations? Winds, wildfire, unpredictability, all those things are cumulative. So you tie that in with having new products and new predictability, which needs to be probably new algorithms, right? With climate change, uh, how do you make sure the airlines are set up and prepared to fly 10 billion passengers in 2050? That's the prediction. 10 billion passengers in 2050. That's 2,000 megatons of CO2 in 2050. So unless we proceed with these new tools and evolve with the environment until we can arrest this, we have to have a methodology and quite honestly, IT platforms in place that allow us to react to the changes in the environment. It's changing.
Yeah, and that demand, I mean, coming around to flight routing is really interesting here too. Yeah, you think every airline is very interested around, saving time, fuel, improved safety, but as you have potentially more flights, more variability, more unpredictability, you talked a little bit about that predictive aspect. How much of a must-have does that become as where, now it can be a nice to have in some cases, but how much does that just become an absolute mandatory way of operation? Because if you think about the things like climate disclosure and more sustainable operations, it's great, but then you also have sort of the day-to-day boots on the ground impact that the weather is bringing to these teams, and they have to be able to mitigate risk and get ahead of it, or else they're just constantly going to be playing catch up.
Yeah, I think there's weather is the basics for all aviation and airline operations. I mean, it's the one thing that you wake up wondering, what is today going to bring me, right? How will my operation run? And every time that it doesn't run efficiently, I mean, it is cost. And airlines are for profit, right? Very tight margins. So weather is becoming more and more of an impact to their CAS and their cost per available seat mile or kilometer. So I think it just becomes even more increasingly important to the airlines and aviation throughout the world is you're going to have to be able to adjust. You're going to have to be able to pivot. And the beauty of that, those investments, those are good investments that yield hard benefit for the airlines. Anything that can reduce your cost of operations is a good investment. That's why I like the fact that reducing fuel burn, no matter how you achieve it, whether it's through weather avoidance programs, through leaning out the airframe, or new protocols or programs, that's a win-win because it reduces the cost of the airline, which goes to their margin, which allows them to reinvest, right, in new platforms. And it also is a reduction in CO2. So it truly is a win-win across all fronts from an eco standpoint and from a financial standpoint. And it's good for the guest because the guest gets more predictability. That's the one thing the guest always wants is I want a predictable schedule. I want to know that if I buy a ticket, I'm going to be treated well, I'm going to leave on time, and I'm going to arrive on time.
Yeah, makes sense. And you kind of hit it with gas and fuel on the de-icing fluid as well. That's one where we see is another good example because I think where it comes down to is this idea of sustainability. We know that it also equates to operational efficiency, which we know, as you mentioned, impacts the operating margins and the bottom line. But something where if you sort of know exactly when you need to de-ice or when you're going to be able to de-ice and what type of fluid, you can not only reduce the amount of fluid that you need to use and put out into the atmosphere, but you're also cutting back on the costs that you need to use. And I know sort of sustainability and sort of the next generation is where you guys are at over in your current venture. sort of talk to me a little bit about how you think about, some of the most exciting things that you all are working on and what comes next.
Yeah, I think it's not just ADL, but it's all companies, right? They're in the aviation space. We've got a responsibility to find a better way. We got a responsibility to find a better path forward to this 2050 goal. I kind of chuckle when you're talking about de-icing, because I think in my 3 years up in Canada, there's nobody better in the world that manages de-icing than Canadians. I mean, they live in that space, and the amount of money that we would have to spend to have a safe operation, it's substantial. And the amount of time and disruption and being able to have more better real-time information on de-icing is would just be paramount for any company. But yeah, ADL aside, I think all companies have this responsibility. We're in a really, really neat, interesting lifetime where we are right now. If you think of artificial intelligence, the evolution of where we are from a technology standpoint, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface. So I'm really quite optimistic. I think and I believe that the 2050 net zero goal will be met. You know what? It's somehow when you put a goal out there and a roadmap, this is an industry. Aviation professionals are hard driving people. A lot of us are type A. We like challenges. We meet objectives, and we always find a way to move the world, and we do it safely, and we do it efficiently. And you look at where we were. I was chuckling the other day. Somebody was saying, if you look, your iPhone that you have in your hand probably possesses more processing power than what was on the first Apollo launches. That wasn't that long ago. So we're just now starting to scratch the surface, and I think of what this industry can do. So I'm uber optimistic on where we land on this.
It's great to hear. Jeff, this has been such a fantastic session. We so appreciate you being a part of the conference. I'll sort of leave you with final thoughts to your peers. Obviously, this is, we're focused here on weather intelligence. We're focused on climate security and sort of the adopting new technologies and trying to think in the future. And you've made so many great points today. I want to give you a chance to kind of wrap it up and share some final thoughts.
No, I think I probably kind of summarized it previously. This is an industry that's resilient. It's an industry that always invests where it needs to. And if a product makes sense and it brings value and does, if it is a betterment for safety, if it's a betterment for efficiency, and it's a betterment for the environment, the airlines and the OEMs will make the right investments. And I think we're starting to see that unfold. Hey, we're talking about it now. More people are talking about it. Capital dollars will flow, and I remain optimistic. So I look forward to seeing the future.
That's great. Jeff, thank you so much again. It was really great speaking with you today.
Thank you, Dan, and I hope everybody has a great conference. And thanks for hosting this. I think it's really, really important. So thank you.
All right, and thanks again, Jeff, for a great session. And now, very excited to turn over to Monica, who's going to introduce our ESG and Climate Adaptation Award winner for the aviation industry. Monica, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. That was a great session with Jeff. Now to announce the winner of our ESG and Climate Adaptation Award within the aviation industry is JetBlue.
Guess which arena I'm in?
How can we leverage this incredible power of sports, this voice that sports gives you, to truly make a difference in the world around us and in people's lives?